My guest today is the Honorable John Olson. John, as I know him, is a retired federal judge. He sat on his bench in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, in the United States for 14 years and had quite a storied career as a judge. Today, in his retirement, he practices a little bit of law, but mainly from his home in Maine, spends time thinking about current events, authenticity, what it means to be honest, what it means to be truthful, and his family. Now let's jump into a conversation that I've had with John where we talk about the lengths that he has traveled in order to make sure that his character and his authenticity are beyond reproach.
It seemed like a good idea at the time. It was one of those, if we're ever going to leave Boston, now's the time to do it. With my then wife, we made a pact that if we couldn't stand it after 2 years, we'd figure out how to get back to New England. And after 2 years, we were happy where we were. It was something of a frontier, not nearly the sophisticated city that Tampa's become. And Florida had probably half as many people as it does now. I got married to my wife in 1973 when I was in law school. And we had a relationship that worked. We raised two absolutely wonderful kids. She had some health issues that caused her to nearly die from anaphylactic shock. And she went on from recovering from that to having a career in public life as an elected member of the Hillsborough County School Board. School boards in Florida are county-wide. And
Hillsborough
is
at Tampa.
Something like the sixth largest school district in the country in terms of student population. And we were somewhat drifting apart, and I had begun to realize after not very many years that I really was gay. And maintaining a personal relationship with someone whom you love, but who is not built the right way, is difficult. And the move to Fort Lauderdale in 2006, when I took the bench, put me in an environment where, goodness, Fort Lauderdale has to be the gayest city in the East Coast.
As someone who is married to a woman who is living in another city, knowing that your nature was not matching the marriage that you made and the children that you had, and arriving on the shores of Wilton Manors, I mean, your eyes must have been saucers.
I realized that I was in an environment where I would be comfortable. And the building that I was living in had a bunch of gay men living on the floor where I rented an apartment. And I was comfortable hanging out with them. And eventually got to a point where I realized that I had to come clean. My ex and I had been in couples counseling, and I finally and with trepidation told our counselor what was really going on. And she was helpful, not terribly helpful, but
you must have been terrified.
Yeah, and I'm not a guy who terrifies very easily.
No, I can see that, but there's still that child inside you're protecting.
Exactly, and the weird thing was that, in retrospect, my mother, on more than one occasion, told me that she seated across from her, sitting on the sofa in her living room, that she'd had a number of people who'd come out to her. And in retrospect, I wonder if she was inviting me at that very moment to do the same. And I suspect in retrospect that yes, she was.
In that very Massachusetts sort of way.
Sort of way.
Yes. So your mother and your father, were you able to come out to either one of them?
I never did.
Do you regret that?
I do. I do regret it because I think that I could have rationalized my life sooner. My mom especially would have helped me through the process of figuring out what that meant. I came out to my ex, which was, I think, a shock to her. And she asked if I wanted a divorce, and I said, not especially, but we both realized that it was impractical. And I was in public life, and she was in public life. And so it seemed to me that what I needed to do was to come clean and to come out loudly and publicly, in part so that the story of, did you hear about Judge Olson, was going to be interesting for about a day. I concluded that I needed to do that in order to be able to live honestly. And so I did. The practice of law and the dispensing of justice and the entire belief by the public that justice is being fairly dispensed requires incredible amounts of honesty and transparency. And I can't imagine trying to operate without that. And the fact that I was gay and had been for many decades, although not acting upon it, meant that I didn't feel that I could act upon it in a public role unless I was divorced and out. And I've got to tell you, Dan, it was so liberating. The heavy weight on the shoulders, the cloud was gone.
The rocks are out of the backpack.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you can walk free and light. We were both there to attend a conference, and I walked into the bar at the hotel we were staying in Barcelona, and Steve was sitting there drinking a martini, and he was the only person in the bar, and I came up, sat down next to him. We started talking, and had a couple of drinks and went out to dinner. He told me a good deal later that his immediate reaction was, oh God, it's a judge. Well, he's not such an asshole. And the word that I'd tried to spread broadly had not made it to Orlando, where he lived and practiced. So he didn't know my story. Well, we went out to dinner, and I told him my story, and he told me his story. And 2 months later, or 3 months later, he moved from Orlando to move in with me. It's been glorious. I mean, we are entirely compatible. We don't look at the world quite the same, but he's got a wicked sense of humor. And we just have a delightful time together. He had an alcohol problem, and it got really bad after we were married, and he finally recognized how bad it was. And he went cold turkey sober. He spent a week in a facility and came out and has never had a drink since. And some, I think, of the mental or his physical, mental, whatever, psychological makeup that had him drinking way too much and becoming an alcoholic or being an alcoholic transmuted into a fixation on some collecting. And so he, more than me, but both of us are probably world-class collectors of tableware.
Probably?
Okay, you've seen. it's how we like to spend time with friends. I love to cook. I'm pretty good at it. Steve operates as the butler and sets the tables. We've got dishes that are amazing, some glassware that is amazing, and some silver that is amazing. And we like to share. What I think has happened when we've had some folks who have been astounded by some of what appears on the table is that they've gotten intimidated, and we don't get as many invites back as we'd like. But we have good friends who are willing to indulge us in enjoying the setting.
Oh, it's like adult dress up. I
mean,
mean,
it really is.
Yeah, it's having a fantasy table in front of you, just as if you're a little boy wearing a Wild West costume or a little girl dressed up in a Cinderella gown. I mean, but it's the grown-up version of that. And you and Steve have perfected the art of that celebration. And, there is a celebration between the two of you and a non-competitive cooperation between the two of you that's really genuine and loving. Now, I'll ask you this question, which is perhaps on the listener's mind and perhaps the $64,000 question, but once you matched your spouse with the gender preference that you were looking for, were you able to be more authentic in your home life and also among your friends together? For example, is the dinner party that you have with Steve, is that something that you would have also been able to pull off before? Or does the realization, the rationalization, and without judging or condemning anything that was before, is there a change here? I mean,
there is. Partly it's who the dinner guests were, and now are. The gay community historically has been shy about advertising itself as the gay community, and a lot of gay folks don't talk about their sexuality and don't embrace it with straight people. And I think that's a pity, but it is, and it will change over time. It certainly has changed over time in bigger cities than Fort Lauderdale. I think you're hard pressed to find a gay bar in Boston anymore because it's fully integrated and it's not a big deal. Our best friends, they live in Coconut Grove and have a home in Connecticut. And during COVID, we would do home and aways every weekend. We'd go south or they'd come north. They're straight, and so what? Many of our friends now are straight couples who are simply perfectly calm and comfortable with interacting with a couple of old gays.
Yeah, John winked. So in the radio show, you always have to tell people when someone makes a wink. Well, I don't know if you're an old gay, John, but it certainly seems like you have found a recipe that works. If you were to say anything to the little granddaughter that I met, or even your future generations that you may not meet, about who their grandfather was, is there anything you would like to leave for the record?
He did his best to be honest and caring, and to treat people well.
I see the honesty as one of the touchstones here of your life. And really, it sounds like in your approach to solving the problem of marrying someone that you loved, but having some serious issues in the marriage, the critical aspect was the honesty about it.
Exactly.
And how has solving the problem and being able to live honestly, how has that affected you even today?
I'm a happier person. I'm a calmer person. My relationship with my daughters and with my 5 grandchildren is terrific. When each of my daughters was 12, I took her on a horseback packing trip in the Northwest. And that was as a bonding exercise, because teenagers and parents need to have a closeness that will survive the raging hormones of teenage years and the angst of parents watching it. We told each of our grandchildren that when he or she was 12 or 13, we'd take them on a trip. Where do you want to go? 2 years ago, we took our eldest grandson, Charles, to Germany for 2 weeks, his choice. And this past summer, we took Henry, number 2 grandson, to Ireland for 2 weeks. In both cases, had an absolutely marvelous time. Both kids turned out to have wicked senses of humor and to be really fun traveling companions. We got to know them as people more than you can in a visit, and particularly in a household where there's lots of other people and lots of other kids with stuff going on all the time. And I treasure the decision that we made to do that, and I've treasured the 2 trips we've had so far. We'll take one again in 2026 with number 3 grandson, and a couple of years after that with our elder granddaughter. I hope I live long enough to do one of those trips with Catherine's daughter Wren in 12 or 13 years.
May that be the case. Well, John, I thank you very much for being honest and open. And this conversation is not perhaps a conversation that very many people that have been in your walk would have wanted to share, but I can see why you want to share it. And I'm touched that you did with me.
I hope that other people who hear this and who relate to at least part of my story will find it in themselves to do the right thing, to be honest with themselves.
And as we have seen in your example, when you do the right thing and you are honest with yourself, the garden grows.
It does, and it grows in ways unpredictable and certainly unpredicted. And I am happier and at peace now than I was for many decades of my life.
That's really beautiful. Well, John, thank you for being on the show today, and I love to hear you shine. That was beautifully moving. Hearing John explain what it means for him to be honest, and how that honesty is the linchpin of everything that he's done in his life, is really remarkable. It is a rare treasure, in fact, to hear a private interview such as the one we did with a man who wore the judge's robe for so many years. Before we wrap up here, I'd like to share something special with you, which is the design brief that I have made over my conversation with John today. The jewelry in my office all starts in a conversation with another person, and from that conversation, I am able to distill a design brief. The design brief that I wrote over the conversation I had with John Olson is called The Lightness of Being. You can read or listen to me read the full design brief, along with seeing the finished piece and some sketches of the jewels, on my website at theintrepidwendell.com/shine. I'm really looking forward to our next episode, where I'll be in Miami talking with Kayla Harrison, the UFC fighter and Olympic gold medalist from 2 different Olympic Games, first in London in 2012 and second in Rio in 2016. Now, Kayla shares with us her unlikely and profoundly life-altering way of being a mother. It's a conversation that is both curious and intimate and moving. Last but not least, if you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to the podcast and share it with someone who might like to hear John's story. You can go visit our website for more behind-the-scenes content. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing a part of your time with me. My name is Daniel Boettcher, and I love to hear you shine.